Most agree there needs to be support for those who find themselves experiencing homelessness. The issue, though, where does that happen?
If I'm gonna be super honest, I would be pretty hesitant to have this in my backyard. We have to clean garbage out of flower beds.
So how do we come together for a solution?
It's going to take neighbors actually being willing to lean in together.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Nonstop Local KHQ podcast, and a special welcome to everybody joining us live on Cord. Really, it is a voice for you to weigh in on the key issues of our time. And weighing in this afternoon with me is Morgan Ashley, one of our anchors here at KHQ. Morgan, good to have you with us.
I'm glad to be here, too. This is a really important topic. We've been really focusing on homelessness this last month. And there's been a lot of questions around this. So this kind of gives us an opportunity to answer some of those questions and talk more in depth about what we've been covering.
So for the past month, we've been looking at all angles of really what is the key issue of our time, homeless crisis in our downtown core and in other neighborhoods. And there is a new push by the city to go away from the one large shelter model to a scattered model that is supported by Mayor Lisa Brown and some other city leaders. And that's what you looked into. First of all, just set the stage on your assignment as a reporter on that piece of this puzzle, how you went about it, who you talked to.
Yeah, so it really starts with a new administration, right? Mayor Lisa Brown was elected into office, and she conducted this audit through her office about how we're dealing with the homelessness crisis. And what they found is that a large shelter model is not conducive to our homeless population. They thought, this is not meeting the needs of the people that are living on our streets. And so what they came up with, and they call it cost effective, as you've talked with Mayor Lisa Brown as well, but smaller scattered sites around town, 20 to 30 people, 20 to 30 beds, where they can really hone in and focus on people's needs, whether that be medical, mental health, whatever the case may be. So they're trying to move toward this model, admittedly, slowly. It's not up to the speed they want it to be. There's 2 shelters currently open. One of those was a winter emergency shelter last year, so it wasn't stood up as, the scattered site model. And that's the one we really focused on when we went and shot this story. So I think it's a work in progress, but it was really interesting to see how much work goes into opening these scattered sites.
I went out and shot an interview recently with Mayor Lisa Brown that will be airing here going forward on Nonstop Local KHQ. So these, your report and my interview, they kind of are hand in glove.
Totally.
I know the mayor told me that the track shelter, which she closed going into winter, which she knew she was going to be criticized for, we talked about that. She called that a, quote, money pitch. She said the minute she came into office, she got a bill for $1 million. She goes, it was not financially sustainable, her position on that,
right,
and that they were moving to this scatter shelter model in conjunction working with nonprofits and churches to connect to people where they are.
Right.
And then hopefully get that safety net under them. I know you talked to a business owner in the northwest quadrant of town, and then you talked to people that are organizing the shelter there. Just kind of go into detail on what they told you, where they're at on this issue.
Yeah. So because this was a winter shelter, the way it was set up was obviously it was for temporary shelter last winter when it was really cold. And then at some point they decided this was going to be our first scattered site model. I think the neighbors I spoke to there were really frustrated with the fact that this was stood up without their knowledge. Some of them say it was 6 to 7 months before they even had a flyer on their door about this shelter being there. And all they knew was they saw people congregating, and then they would see like EMS and police responding a lot. The process that I'm told from here on out will be Empire Health. So basically they're being contracted by the city. They'll go around, identify these sites, and then first talk to the community, go to the neighborhood council. If it's a church, as you mentioned, which that's the majority of the space they've been talking to our churches, getting congregations on board first, and then going through the process of finding a provider, which is also labor intensive. And then when are we going to open? Here's the funds. All that other stuff has to come together.
The business owner that you talked to, Boo, he was frustrated in that interview.
Yeah.
Said he's had to go out, pick up garbage and other things.
Right.
My takeaway from watching that interview and watching your report was he was also compassionate on the issue. That is an interesting, conflicting dynamic for him, but I think it's a microcosm of how everybody feels about this.
Yeah.
Talk about what he told you when it comes to, being compassionate about other human beings and at the same time being frustrated as a business owner, because I think that sums up what we have heard over and over and mirrored in our community.
Well, and it's just that conflicted, right? So he wants to be compassionate, but then at the same time doesn't want it outside his door. And he admitted that. That's conflicting. That doesn't make sense, right? So it was really interesting talking to him because he's like, listen, admittedly, I get to go home at night. This is not where I sleep. This is not where my family plays. This is where I go to work and I get to go home. So it's a 9 to 5 issue for him, which I thought good on him to admit, right? But yeah, he said, he said he never had an issue with anybody at that shelter specifically, but he said there was this problem that followed with it. And I don't know, he couldn't even directly identify, are these homeless people connected to those getting services at the shelter? But he said, regardless, the timing is there. We've cleaned up garbage. We've cleaned up human waste. We've had electrical lines cut outside of our building because people are using outlets.
They're tapping into the electricity and stealing it.
Right. And he's like, that had never been an issue before this shelter was here. So he sees both sides of it. And honestly, neighbors felt the same way, that even the ones I talked to off camera that didn't want to talk on camera, all of them said, we know this is an issue. We're not ignorant to the problem. We don't want it in our neighborhood. Right? So what neighborhood does it go in?
Well, I think
guess
that leads me to my next question. In your report, you touched base with Empire Health.
Yeah.
The mayor told me directly, Empire Health is the linchpin of the scattered shelter model.
Right.
They are really the ground zero, if you will, and they want to take this on. She feels strongly, and she told me, which you'll see in a report later on this week, that behavioral health resources is the key to unlock what no city has been able to solve at this time. Behavioral health, Empire Health, that piece of your report, what did they tell you? What was important to him? What stood out to you in that?
Well, Empire Health's all about health equity, right? That's their mission. So it's kind of a no duh that they would be involved in this in a lot of ways. But I think I think they didn't, honestly, my take from talking with Zeke, who's very dedicated to the cause, lives in the neighborhood of the scattered site that we profiled. The heart is there. I don't think that they realized how much work this was going to be, as anybody would, right? And he admitted, I'm going to be totally honest. He said this to me. People are not on board. This community is not on board with this.
That was my takeaway from the mayor too. And she stressed that this has to be all area leaders.
Right.
Valley, county leaders, law enforcement, political leaders. I know in Boise, they do have a unified voice and they have an efficient strategy. And it has teeth. It's working in Boise because Republicans and Democrats and the sheriff, they've gotten in a room. They've gotten together. They unify that message. I know that's a challenge here. That's a hurdle. And he mentioned that.
Yeah, no, he said they are working on behalf of the city, right? They've been contracted to do this. They're being paid $350,000 to do this work. And he just admitted, he's like, hey, this is not work that's not happening fast. Which is on our side of the thing, of this journalism, getting people to admit things like that is really, it's not like I went digging for it. You know what I mean? Like, it was really nice that he just was upfront about it. This is the reality of the work. We're really ready to take it on, and just admitting that this has not been an easy process.
Let me ask you then, because you touched on something that I have noticed, and it's in fairly recent memory. There's starting to be a complete candor. A complete transparency, whether they're frustrated and they've been immersed in it a while, whether they just look at it as this daunting mountain they have to climb, or this huge hurdle that they truly don't have a solution on how to overcome that hurdle.
Right.
So they're just being, and I think that communication piece, you're starting to see absolute transparency.
Yeah.
I think that's where it starts, and you picked that up from him.
That was he was like that on the phone when I talked to him prior, and wanting to set the story up, and then in person on camera, completely honest. And I think, to your point, I think nobody has the one solution. Nobody's figured it out, really. I mean, we point to Boise, they have a system, but they haven't solved the issue.
They haven't solved the issue at all. They've made some progress.
Right. So I think everybody's on board that there's not one solution. We're all just trying to figure it out. And just admitting that it takes a lot of work is just being honest. Is this what this is?
So
you
what
know?
did he tell you? What is the plan of action for his
Yeah.
organization?
So right now they're in talks with, I think, 3 or 4 different sites, most of them churches, because a lot of the congregations are not showing up in person like they used to. So they have a lot of unused space. They sometimes they'll have bathrooms. You know, these sites need to have certain things. The one that we went to had an off-site, like portable showers and stuff
Sure.
like that.
Yep.
So you need to finding space is their biggest issue right now, he said. So they're talking with churches, they're in neighborhood councils. I mean, they're having like chili with, neighborhoods. I mean, they're doing boots on the ground work right now. But it seems like he's like, we're just hitting walls with questions and we want to answer all the questions. It just takes a lot of time.
Did he have an idea on how you break down those walls? It's a similar question that I asked the
Yeah.
mayor.
I think it was the same as how we conducted business when we shot this interview, is being honest about it and asking, what are your questions? How can I help you feel better about this? What can I answer? I'm not going to, nothing's off, there's nothing we can't talk about, essentially, is kind of how he framed it. He's willing to answer any question anybody has. It's just, there's a lot of questions.
The mayor told me that, right now we have to get everybody at the same table.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that has been a challenge. That's something that echoed in the interview you did with Zeke.
Yeah.
There are some that want to participate in the blame game, or they want to point fingers about somebody that's doing something wrong. I don't know if you asked Zeke this, but I did ask the mayor directly. I said, how, as leader of the city,
Mm-hmm.
do you break down that communication wall?
Yeah.
Do you get people to the table to have a sobering conversation
Mm-hmm.
so you can come up with a unified strategy?
Well, that's where he was like, we have a meal with them. We meet on a human level. We have a meal with them and we talk with them. And then he said also, he encourages people to go to these shelters and volunteer. I mean, he volunteered in the shelter that's in his neighborhood near Garland. And he's like, I think if people see it firsthand, the work that's being done, that breaks down the fear barrier. Not everybody's going to do that, right? But that was his recommendation is, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to have a meal with these people. We're going to talk it out. And then I'm going to encourage them to show up. If you want to be a part of the solution, please show up.
1 to 10, what's his level of optimism with the scattered shelter model?
I think he's about an 8, I would say.
So
I
he's
think
very optimistic. He thinks this can be
is.
successful.
Yes. And I think it goes back to the behavioral health needs and the special medical needs that people have. And I think they specialize in that work. You know what I mean? So he's feeling confident in that.
I do want to look at our Cord board. And if you have a question and you're on Cord and you're watching us right now live, please send your question. If we can answer it, we certainly will at least have a conversation about it. Ava Clarkson writing in, thank you for taking the time to talk about this important issue. So Ava, thanks for being on board, listening to what is really the key conversation that is being had in so many different circles, whether it's behavioral health, whether it's political, whether it's law enforcement. Everybody is having this conversation in their own silos. And I think it's a matter of getting everybody into that same room. You were told that by Zeke. I was told that by the mayor. I was told that by Chief Kevin Hall, who I recently interviewed.
Yeah.
Chief says, people think we should just go and pull them off the street. He goes, the way the law is structured in Washington State right now, if it's a low-level offense, we, by law, have to cite and release.
Mm.
So it's just an evolving problem. The business owners, why can't you do something? The chief said they're looking to make legislation a little bit stronger so they can do some other things that they're unable to do right now.
Right.
But again, Ava, thanks for weighing in on Cord for us and for making that statement. We appreciate you being with us. Anybody else that's watching right now, Morgan, as we move forward, the scattered site model, they're looking at the churches, they're looking at nonprofits, they're looking at smaller places in each quadrant of the city.
Yeah.
The mayor said the big warehouse model, there's anonymity. You don't know who's come through.
Mm-hmm.
You can't connect them to services. You can't follow up on it. That was her take on that. Building these out, it's going to take time.
Yeah. I think to your point too, talking about the chief and what he said, there's a few officers I've spoke with too. And I think these scattered sites are by referral only. That's a really important part to point out because it's not like a shelter where you can just show up, knock on the door and want in. And from the police perspective, I think they're a little frustrated by that because they say, some of that I've talked to is that they'll make these referrals, but these shelters are full or that person doesn't want to show up. So there's so many obstacles to getting into one of these 20 to 30 bed shelters, even though the mayor believes that's the solution, you're not just walking up and knocking on the door,
Well,
you know?
and it's not like they can look to other cities that have implemented this scattered site model.
Right.
What stood out to me in my conversation with the mayor and with the chief is nobody's really done this before, the smaller scattered site models that you reported on.
Right.
And she said, we're pioneering this. We're trying it. We're looking for a different solution.
Mhm.
For the business owner that you talked to,
Yeah.
did they ultimately come away with, it's a struggle for me, it's a frustration for me, but we also have to give this a chance, or were they against it? What was their stance? Or were you able to even defer that?
Yeah, no, I mean, at the end of the interview, his last kind of closing thought was, I am open to this dialogue. I want to have this conversation. We didn't have this conversation for this shelter. So it was really specific to that shelter. But I think his thought was, if this had been brought on board to the entire community beforehand, maybe this neighborhood specifically would have been on board and supportive. But because of how it was brought online, that specific site, I think there's still
Well,
some tension there.
and I think that is going to be the feeling for a
Yeah.
while until it's proven that they can exist in those neighborhoods
Yeah.
and the business owners are protected somewhat. And that is all tentacles of a plan that's in its infancy right now.
Hmm.
And the mayor told me, I said, how's this funded? And she goes, when I came into office, I reached out for funding on the
Right.
state level.
Yeah.
She goes, we secured that funding.
Yes.
And she goes, she is trying to come up with a model that is financially sustainable. She said the track shelter, they were dumping money. It wasn't a financially sustainable model.
Right.
She's also gotten huge pushback on that. Not everybody agrees with the scattered site model.
Hmm.
So this is all playing out in our community right now.
Yeah.
Where it goes, no one has that answer.
Yeah.
They are shifting to something that hasn't been tried. There are critics of it, heavy critics of it. It's a wait and see on whether it gains traction and it makes an impact. The mayor told me point blank, she didn't want to put a timeline on it. She goes, a year from now, you're going to see a noticeable difference on the homeless issue on our streets and getting people off the streets.
Hmm.
I said, how soon could somebody see a positive turn on something that has been so frustrating for many, yet people are still super humane and compassionate that these are human beings
Yeah.
that have fallen on hard times. What stands out to me is every single person that is out there without a home is out there for a unique reason in their own individual path that broke down and they ended up on the streets.
Yeah.
So I think context is important for that.
Yeah.
Just your bottom line takeaway on where we're at, where you see this going based on what you learn and the people you talk to.
To be honest, I was very surprised at the compassion. That shocked me a little bit. Just based off of being from here and seeing the evolution of homelessness in our city, even just from a couple of years ago. I think people are starting to realize what you just said. These are human beings. And clearly we haven't found the solution. Like if you've been looped in at all, in any degree, you realize that this is a problem that obviously is not going anywhere.
Well, it's an internal dialogue in each and every individual that calls this area home.
Yeah.
They're frustrated. They
Yeah.
drive downtown. They're frustrated.
Mhm.
Business owners are at their wits' end. Their financial bottom line is razor thin.
Right.
Somebody breaks their storefront window, that really can make or break your business.
Totally.
So what about the business owner? But what about the compassionate piece? What
Yeah.
about the people that are addicted to fentanyl? I know fentanyl is a big driver of this. There's a big push to combat that fentanyl coming into the area, because when they're hooked on fentanyl, it even reasoning and rationale goes out the window.
Right.
And then it's just drug addiction that you're trying to treat. That's first and foremost to get them stable.
Right.
So there's so many layers, and it's such a complex issue. And I think this is the conversation of our time. This is the conversation that our area leaders have to have. This is a conversation that we in the media need to have, and we need to cover these stories. I'm really proud of your story and the other stories that we've done this November, because they've gone into a further depth and detail that the media necessarily hasn't done.
Right.
This is a different level of depth and detail and layer. And I think we have an obligation in the big picture of the issue of our time, of talking to the people that are making the decisions, talking to the people that are living and breathing it from different vantage points, coming up with different solutions and different ideas. And at that point, applying what you're learning and also providing layered, detailed, deep information to everybody that trusts us as a media source. I think
Yeah.
all of those things have to come together as one. There has to be some unification. There has to be clear communication, which, based on the people you talk to, based on the number of interviews I've done, not just in recent memory, but over the years,
Yeah.
there is a barrier of communication between all of the parties that need to be unified to come up with a strategy, then apply that strategy, make it efficient, and make it effective.
Totally. And another part I want to pull up too, and I'm going to pull up my email just so I get the numbers correctly, but everybody wants to ask about money, as you talked about the money from the legislature. So the specific dollars that are going to these scattered sites from the city. So it's 3.9 million from the legislature and then 1.8 million from American Rescue Plan Act. And then, like I said, Empire Health's taking $350,000, and then that money flows through them to the providers. Just because that's state money, that doesn't mean that's not our taxpayer dollars. I think that that's what people get hung up on too is, well, how much are we funding this? How much have we already put toward this? The city's going to tell, obviously, that this is all state money that they are funding these through. That's still money we're paying. So that's also a big part of this too. You know, the track shelter was $1 million, right, when she walked in. I mean, that's a lot of money. So we also have to factor in, are we willing to solve this crisis? I mean, I don't know what it is long term over, say 10 years to live in Spokane and pay for this. What does that look like? I think that's a big concern for a lot of people.
I think your instinct on that and your gut checker on that is spot on. It's people want it fixed. Well, you're going to have to contribute in some way.
Right.
Every single person that lives here and calls the Inland Northwest home has to contribute in some way, whether it's financially and it's tax money, whether it's volunteering, there's so many ways this needs to be put under the microscope and magnified. We need to, and I know that some city leaders and area leaders have looked to success stories in other cities.
Yeah.
There's been some traction we mentioned in Boise.
Right.
There's been some inroads made in Houston.
Yeah.
There's been some inroads made in San Diego. And Chief Hall recently traveled over to Seattle, looked at their DAT program where they are having some tangible results for the better.
Yeah.
So I know they're looking at everything. Again, many of the interviews I've done, they've told me point blank, nobody solved this at this time.
Yeah.
This is something that's different that we're trying, the scattered shelter model that you reported on.
And I think if maybe homelessness doesn't directly affect you or it's not in your neighborhood, the money part is the hook, right? You're paying for it. As a taxpayer, you're paying for it. So then you should automatically care. That's your investment. So I think that we're going to see in the next 5 to 10 years, hopefully some change because of that motivating factor. I would hope.
And just on a emotional level for me, I was born here. You're from here.
Yeah.
It has changed so much.
Right.
It's transformed, and it's kept me awake. How does this get solved? These are humans. How do we help them? And at the same point, protect our city, protect the business owners, protect the people that want to take their family downtown that maybe are a little more reluctant to go downtown because of the adverse situation down there. But on an emotional level, that's where it gets me sometimes.
Yeah.
And you have to be compassionate, but you also have to be willing to add to the equation in a positive way to come up with a solution.
Yeah. And, you touched on fentanyl. That's something I've been heavily involved with, Spokane Alliance on Fentanyl Education. And that is a big piece of this, right? Is drug use or just mental health. It all correlates, right?
Yeah.
And if you talk to the sheriff, John Knowles, about it, his daughter obviously went through treatment for fentanyl.
Sure.
And he shared that story with us. And his stance on it is that people sometimes need to be forced into treatment, right?
Yeah. His story, you've, sat down with his daughter, and he's shared with me. We've had just very candid conversations about it. I have some familial experience with drug addiction too. And so I've lost a brother as well. And it all goes in. And I think Sheriff Knowles he's like, I'm not going to let my loved one go. These are people's loved ones, whether they're estranged, whether they have no idea where they are. This is a reality of our time.
Yeah.
The fentanyl piece, I know there's pushback. The mayor told me they're doubling down resources on pushing back on the fentanyl coming in here. I've done numerous in-depth interviews with the District Attorney of Eastern Washington. I know the fentanyl flow comes up basically from Mexico through Oregon, through the Tri-Cities, and then right into Central Washington, and then over here to our area. And they're looking to push back on that and fight back on that. There's a concerted effort to push back on that trail of fentanyl that's coming up into our state and really our entire region, whether you're listening in Washington or Idaho or Oregon, it's happening. And so there's a big pushback on that piece as well. How long have we been talking here? Almost a half hour.
Yeah.
There are so many layers. I mean, this is just the tip of the iceberg of the conversation.
It really is.
And so it shows you 30 minutes in, there are so many different things to talk about. We're going to continue to have this conversation. Morgan, I thank you for being here and sharing your insights and your reporting. And you know, it just wasn't the one report. You've been immersed on this like I have, and talking to the people that are making the decisions that hopefully will transform people's lives, people that are homeless, their lives for the better, but transform our area for the better for everybody that lives here.
Yeah. And like you said, it's going to take everybody coming together on it.
It is.
So I think we're getting closer talking to all of our area leaders, but there's still work to be done.
Well, appreciate your reporting.
Yeah.
Appreciate your time on the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Of course. Glad to be here.
And thanks to all of you that joined us on Cord and watched at home or wherever you are on your phone. We appreciate that. Such an important conversation. And just appreciate you being on this podcast, helping save Spokane, Not in My Backyard. Additional podcasts on this issue are available on your favorite podcasting app or at nonstoplocal.com. And if you're interested in joining live events for our podcast, we're creating this all together. We want to have a conversation, not just in this room, but with you at home, wherever you're in earshot of this conversation, because it's so important. Wherever you want to join us for live events, you can sign up by going to cordspokane.com. Thanks so much. On behalf of Morgan Ashley, I'm Sean Owsley. Thanks for being with us.